Thank you so much, Adam. Thanks for having me, everybody. And I'm really honored to be able to introduce Chanda Prescod-Weinstein, who is important to me. We haven't met in person, but you are you're one of the new generation of public thinkers that has been most influential on me in the past few years. I follow your public voice, and now I've been reading your book, and my heart is often truly moved when I see what you have to say or read what you have to say, Chanda, and if I may. And I've wanted for a very long time to introduce you to the audience that is following along right now, people that I care about very much, the movement of secular humanistic Judaism, without whom I really would not be involved in anything organizedly Jewish, except maybe, maybe something like a J Street or something dealing with Israel-Palestine peace, such as it may be. So thank you for being here. And to the audience, I just want to say that we're truly lucky to have Chanda with us, a writer, scholar, and activist of just world-class caliber, the greatest level of those things that I think one can rise to in this world. Reflective, funny, provocative, above all, deeply ethical about what it means to be a scientist today. And in addition to address questions of identity, what it means to be a Black, Jewish, American, human, and so many other things. But I'm burying the lead. I also want to say, if you love science, as I know so many of us on this Zoom do, if you love reading Hawking or Dawkins, if you obsess over Einstein or Feynman or Tesla, the man or the cars, you need to read and get multiple copies of this book, The Disordered Cosmos, A Journey into Dark Matter, Space-Time, and Dreams Deferred. It's fresh off the presses, and it's just one of the most important science books of my lifetime, flat out. So go get it. Now, thank you for being with us. I want to recognize your limited time, Dr. Prescod-Weinstein. So could you just talk about the opening quote of the book first? I thought that would be appropriate. You start the book with a quote from your mother. People need to know. What do people need to know that you chose to share there?
Well, first I should say thank you for having me and for the kind introduction. The quote from my mother, Margaret Prescod, is, "People need to know that we live in a universe that is bigger than the bad things that are happening to us." And my mom said that casually to me on the phone one evening when I called her during a week, I guess that was probably feeling a lot like this one does right now. Where I'm a theoretical physicist by training. I'm a particle physicist. I think about early universe cosmology, and so basically the origin and evolution of particles and large scale structures like galaxies. And I don't know, this must have been like 4 or 5 years ago, I was really struggling with, what does it mean for me to do this work while people are out in the streets defending my life, defending other people's lives? And my mom is a political organizer. My dad is a political organizer. So I get it on the Prescod and the Weinstein sides. And I was trying to make sense of like, how do I fit into this? And in a lot of ways, like the through line of the book, which is really about the right to know and love the night sky in peaceful conditions. So much like what I think Itai was just talking about with the work that he is doing. Is driven by this comment that my mom made to me, which is that like the universe has to be more than the terrible things that are happening to us. And also that when we start to think about how to make the universe accessible to people, that actually then the terrible things have to stop happening. When we talk about like equity, diversity, and inclusion, particularly like that word of inclusion or like equality, that really means that we have to rethink the conditions under which people experience the night sky. So for example, in Gaza right now, the night sky is a pretty scary place. It's also, I think to a different extent scary for people who are the targets of rockets. But you know, let's think about how much does it change your experience of the night sky when missiles are coming from it, right?
Yeah, yeah. You merge the scientific and the political so beautifully in this book, and I think, you know, a lot of us that were sort of raised on the idea that there's pure science out there that is disconnected from the political. If we were to read your writing thoughtfully, we might come away realizing that we can never afford to look at it that way again. No.
Yeah, I think the funny thing, I don't know, or maybe for today in particular, the comment that I've been making to people is that people often act like science or how we do science is something that was handed down to us like tablets on a mount. This is one of my favorite analogies. And I think it's a particularly apt one for Shavuot, because this is actually the day when this is the week really when we kind of honor that moment. Either, you know, whether you believe it literally or whether for you it's like a metaphor or a story of receiving Torah, of receiving like tablets on the mount, of receiving the story. But it is actually not like that, at least when it comes to science, that science is a social phenomenon and it's something that happens in context. And so actually earlier today, I had to miss it, but there was a Scientist for Palestine event with two Palestinian scientists who were, it was literally called Doing Science Under Bombs. And so you know, one of the questions that we have to ask ourselves continuously, and I have to ask myself continuously, is what does it mean to do business as usual? Like, I've been on break for the last week. Tomorrow, I'm going to go back to work. I'm going to be checking in with my students. I'm going to be talking to them about galaxies and dark matter. What does it mean for me to do that work while other people in various places, whether it's in Central America or Palestine, et cetera, are running for their lives? Those things are not disconnected because they're all human choices in some sense of like, where do we place our focus? And so for me, I think that that's really the connection, is that I'm constantly making decisions about where to place my focus. And there can be a tension there. And that comes back to what my mother was saying to me, that like, in some ways you can't just make your entire life about, you know, fight, but there has to be something that you're struggling for on the other end. And so I see the role that I play in some sense of giving people a vision of what is this world? What do we want the world to look like? What do we want the things that we are doing with ourselves to be on the other side of the fight for justice?
So much there, and I'm struck by the image of looking up at the sky, and how you somewhat revolutionize our perception of just that act. And then I want to bring sort of some focus as well to what we then learn about ourselves from looking up, right? And so very early in the book, you have a great phrase, "Black lives are star stuff." And there's so much there that fills that out. And you know, one might say, as Jews, even cultural Jews, you know, who again wouldn't be involved in a religious or Jewish organization like myself, we're still, I think it's fair to say, you know, certainly was for me, that I was very much taught to humanize fellow Jews. I might have had severe disagreements with many of them, but I would have seen them as star stuff like myself, right? Carl Sagan, who we associate, and you discussed this in the book a little bit, and Cosmos was influential for you. You know, culturally Jewish. His daughter, Sasha Sagan, my friend, will be on this very Zoom later. And cultural Judaism was important for them. We met through her being, her having her wedding officiated by a colleague of mine, Peter Schweitzer. But, you know, I don't know if all Jews, or if anywhere near enough Jews, for put it that way, even humanistic Jews, get really good education about the idea that Palestinian lives are star stuff, not to mention Black lives being star stuff. So talk about that. I mean, from your perspective, the comment about star stuff is so deep. It's filled with so much knowledge. So what does it mean to you, and what does it mean to you now that you're an author on this subject of a published book?
one of the reasons that I made a point of emphasizing that, I think particularly in this political moment where there's so much more visibility of the kinds of violence that people are subjected to, because social media makes it easier to transmit things, that we all have like these devices that make it easier for us to record things and share them, and get information out quickly in ways that circumvent traditional media and government outlets, that we're learning, or I guess I have to hesitate and say we, because I grew up in a community where the police were killing people and harassing people. And so this is a reality that I grew up with, but I think that as a public and a society, we together are learning just the number of ways that magical realism becomes part of like police report and police imagination. Like, oh, he was holding a cell phone, but it looked like a gun. Like literally anything looks like a gun in the hands of a Black person to the police. I can't imagine, you know, tackling her. I had to shoot her. Like there are all of these. And so what I wanted to emphasize to people is that there is this sense sometimes that Black people are somehow made of something different. You know, there are these stereotypes that like we're better at, you know, dancing and better at basketball, even though there are like completely reasonable, like social explanations for like why it's built into us. It's built into our communities culturally in ways that it isn't for others. So of course, like you're probably going to be better at dancing if that's something you've been doing since like you could walk, versus like if you weren't, right? And I wanted to emphasize that we are people too. And this is, I think, a different way of saying that Black Lives Matter. And, you know, in the context of again, like what's been happening over the last week, or, you know, 73 years, depending on how you look at it, you know, I'm thinking a lot about how easy it is to, when we talk about what's happening in Palestine, to point to Palestinians and then say, well, how come the Arab nations aren't doing something for them? And I think people don't realize that there's like a dehumanization that's involved there in saying, well, those people should take care of their own. And it really is like basically like the equivalent of like, what about Black on Black violence when you're trying to talk about like systemic injustice at the hands of the police? And so I think that, you know, in an interesting way, thinking about the fact that we are all actually built from the same thing challenges us to ask these questions of what differences do we believe in, and what differences are we entitled to maintain, I guess. So I think that that's one way of thinking about my decision to emphasize that. And I think, like, you know, also like as a nerd, like, I'm going to be teaching Intro to Stellar Astrophysics again to my students at University of New Hampshire this fall. And I'm actually really excited about it because like one of the things that the students come out of my class knowing is where all of the elements that we are made of come from on a cosmological scale. Part of their final grade will be based on giving presentations on, they have to pick an atomic element and they have to tell its cosmological story. This is when gold was first made. This is how we think it's made. This is how it ended up on Earth. And that's all, like, you know, so gold is a bad example, but let's like pick oxygen. That's actually like part of who we are, right? We're mostly made out of water. It's part of who we are. And so there really is like, you know, also this key like scientific statement. This is who we are. This is what we are made of. And we are all made of that together.
Yeah, thank you. And another piece of the early book, the early book is just filled with these lines that jump out at people, that jumped out at me. I want to hold it up again. Go get this. We spend an enormous amount, you're talking about the galaxy, and you say we spend an enormous amount of time looking at our own and wondering if it is normal. And I laughed out loud with that. I just wanted to hear you talk about it for a second. Like, you know, it's a great laugh out loud line, but it's also from your perspective inside this elite world of theoretical physics and academia. You know, there's just so much there. So unpack it for a bit.
Yeah, I think the fun thing about that comment, I often feel like sometimes like my role is fighting scientists with science, which is like pointing out to scientists like the ways in which we are not scientific, which is like maybe like my role, like I'm a member of a Reconstructionist congregation. And so like in some ways I think of this as like highly Reconstructionist behavior, which is I'm always like reinterpreting, these are our tenets, but these are how they apply in the world that we live in. And so I think one of the interesting things is that we tend to think of the scientific method as like a key component of it is reproducibility. You should be able to show that this thing happens repeatedly, no matter how many times you run the experiment. One of the challenges that we face in doing like cosmology and astrophysics is that we can't rerun the universe experiment. Like that's one experiment that at least we haven't figured out how to do. And I worry about the day when people start trying to figure out how to reproduce the universe experiment. And so we do have this basic problem where we are studying the Milky Way. We know so many things about the Milky Way. In fact, we just got more data back from the Gaia experiment, and Gaia collected information about so many stars that we can actually track the impact that the Milky Way is having on its satellite galaxies. So we tend to think of the Milky Way as like, our little island in the universe, but actually the Milky Way is a host galaxy that has something like 60 satellite galaxies that are sometimes called dwarf galaxies orbiting it. And we're just now starting to understand what is the gravitational impact. How is the Milky Way stripping stars off of, for example, the Large Magellanic Cloud, which if you have a good telescope, you can actually go out and look at the LMC. So I think it's interesting that we face this challenge of we're constantly trying to figure out our location in the universe, and we really see ourselves as highly scientific. And then also we're trying to extrapolate this information about how galaxies are from just looking at like one galaxy and then like one set of satellites and kind of going, okay, so we've learned all this information about the Milky Way. Are we sure that like this is what all the galaxies are like, or are we like the weirdos? And I guess like I'll just say in the context of, you might think, well, why would we think we are the weirdos? We already know that most of the matter in the universe is dark matter, that actually the kind of stuff that we are made of, which scientifically we call baryonic matter, but like everyday stuff, us, the trees, your desk, your chair, your incredible book collection, everything there is baryonic matter, but actually most of the matter in the universe is dark matter. So we already know that in some sense we are the weirdos. And the question is, like, to what extent are we the weirdos?
Well, whatever kind of weirdos we are, you're one of my favorite in the world. And in secular humanistic Jewish circles, we spend a lot of time actually talking, telling stories about terrorizing Jewish religious Sunday school teachers. With all of these questions about what really happened and what do we really believe. And you've got a great story about that in your book, although it's not about a Jewish Sunday school. It's about terrorizing your mother with questions, and then you actually do a great job questioning an early elementary school teacher about racism, and it was just so sort of both educational and identifiable. Something that I could identify with at the same time. And you talk about it from the context of being part of the chosen few. That your academic career, I didn't have a chance to introduce it very well, but your academic career has been extraordinarily interesting. It's a lot of it is detailed in the book. You're part of the chosen few to understand the concepts that you do. Most people that have ever walked the earth have not, but chosen few, chosen people. What's the parallel there? What are you getting at there?
I have to say that I have a lot of regrets about the book. I will say that a friend of mine told me recently that you write a book and publish it so you can find out what book you wish you had written, and that's like how that works. Always. And I think, the interesting thing is I include the Ma'arif at the end of the beginning of the book. And then at the end of the letter to my mother, at the end, I include the Traveler's Prayer with my own largely secular interpretation of the Hebrew. And I think that my Jewishness is like all over the book. And I think that Jews reading the book will read it and be like, yeah, this is a phrase that sounds familiar, or this is a line of reasoning that sounds familiar, particularly in the introduction. Even in the first few sentences, I stuck a sentence in there that was basically like, hi, this is Genesis. And I think the reason it was there was not actually to signpost to people, but literally I was writing that section and I was like, this won't sound right without a sentence that sounds like that. I think that, you know, Passover is my favorite holiday because it is in part a holiday for asking questions. And I think we are people who ask questions, whether we believe in the supernatural or not. It's cultural for us. And I love that about being Jewish. And I think it's all over the book.
I want to finish, since I'm mindful of our time, with a last question about the use of liturgy. And I'll go with the one at the beginning. For you as a Reconstructionist Jew, and for myself, ourselves as secular humanistic Jews, there's a lot of overlap and common feeling there. A lot of identification, I think, with the other. Much made of the fact that Mordechai Kaplan, the founder of Reconstructionist Judaism, and Sherwin Wine, the founder of our movement, both signed the same 1973 Humanist Manifesto document. But there's difference in how we do liturgy. Reconstructionist is in part about reconstructing the meanings of the liturgy. Humanistic Judaism, we reinvent liturgy more often than that. You use the prayer, as you mentioned, Baruch atah Adonai Elokeinu, you write, Melech haolam, but you introduce your translation with "Blessed are you, universe," which really is you making some creative new liturgy, creating some creative new liturgy. What's there for you? How, talk about the significance of starting out your book with a piece of reimagined liturgy that is "Blessed are you, universe."
Yeah, I'll answer this one really quickly and just say that it's partly my rabbi's fault. So Rabbi Toba Spitzer, I actually asked her, what prayers should I include? I originally had the Shechakiyanu there. And she was like, I just think that the Ma'ariv is there. And then I said, okay, but what about interpretations? And she said, well, okay, here are some suggestions, but really this is for you to interpret. And I think it was like an extremely like Reconstructionist rabbi congregant moment, which is like, it is your task to reinterpret this prayer for the time that you are in and for the text that you are working with. And I guess the last comment I will make there is that my spouse recently got very excited in Hebrew class talking about the fact that olam can mean world, it can mean time, and it can also mean all of space. And he was like, Jews knew about space-time as a single unified concept the entire time. So I think that there's also that element there, which is that we do actually have flexible interpretations of these words already, even in the context of like maybe a more orthodox reading of them.
Beautiful. I just posted your extremely popular Twitter in the chat. Your husband is also a great follow. He's sort of anonymous, but he's your, he's your husband on Twitter, and it's wonderful. And I'll also post the link to the book. Really, my friends on this session, we got to read and discuss it together sometime. All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Prescod-Weinstein.
Thank you so much for having me.